Hi, welcome to Lies and Secrets channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. The house was quiet, almost too quiet as I sat at the dining table, my finger hovering over the confirmation button on my phone screen. The aroma of freshly brewed chamomile tea lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil. In my mind, Iko Martini was about to make a decision that would change everything. It had been weeks since I first noticed that unsettling feeling creeping into our home. First, I brushed it off as stress from work or maybe just a phase in our marriage. But as the days went by, it became impossible to ignore. The planned luxury cruise that my husband Edward had arranged with his overbearing mother Charlotte was the final straw. I wasn't invited. Of course I never was. When it came to their little escapades, it was just one more way for them to exclude me, to treat me as if I were nothing but an unwelcome addition in my own marriage. The realization hit me hard, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth that even the sweetest tea couldn't wash away. With a trembling breath, I pressed the button cancel reservation. The screen flashed, confirming my action, and I felt a mix of relief and dread wash over me. There was no going back now. I spent the next few hours in a day moving around our spacious San Edward home like a ghost. I watered the potted succulents on the windowsill as a housewarming gift from my best friend Mia. I straightened the framed photos on the mantel, my eyes lingering on one of Edward and me on our wedding day. We looked so happy then, so in love. Where did it all go wrong? The sound of keys jangling in the lock snapped me out of my reverie. Edward was home. I could see the tension in his stance even before he spoke, his broad shoulders rigid under his tailored suit. I braced myself, knowing the confrontation was inevitable. "What have you done?" His voice, normally smooth and composed, was now laced with venom. His eyes, usually a warm brown, were now bright with fury. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I couldn't stand it anymore. I explained, my voice calm but firm. "You're abandoning me again to chase after a vacation with her." I flinched as rage flashed across his face, his hands curling into fists at his sides. What came next was something I had never expected. His hand shot out swift and hard. The sound of the slap shattered the silence of our home, echoing off the walls like a gunshot. I crumbled to the floor, dizzy from the impact. The world spun around me and I could taste blood in my mouth. His chilling words rang in my ears. "Why did you do this? You've ruined this marriage." Pain and disbelief battled within me as black spots danced across my vision. Then darkness in those fractured moments before unconsciousness consumed me. One final thought echoed. What have I gotten myself into? When I came to, I was still on the cold, tiled kitchen floor, my face throbbed with pain, my cheeks swollen and tender to the touch. For a moment, I thought the worst had already passed. But as I slowly regained my senses, I realized it was only the beginning. The silence around me was eerie. Edward was nowhere to be seen. I pushed myself up weakly and reached for my phone. But it wasn't where I remembered placing it. In fact, nothing seemed as it should. My purse was gone, my keys were missing, and when I stumbled to the front door, I found the security lock activated. Edward controlled it through a remote app, and now I couldn't leave. Panic began to set in as I moved from room to room, searching for any sign of what had happened. While I was unconscious in the kitchen, a note on the fridge caught my eye, hastily scribbled in Edward's familiar handwriting. "I'm handling this." What did that mean? Was he still furious? Had he gone to his mother's house to find solace, or was there something more sinister at play? I walked into our bedroom, my steps unsteady and stopped cold. Closet doors were open, my side of the wardrobe rifled through. Clothes were missing, not just one or three items, but entire sections of my wardrobe gone. It was then that I noticed a small envelope sitting on my bedside table, marked only with my first name, with trembling hands. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. First, it didn't seem significant. It was just an old picture of Edward and me at our wedding, but scratched across the surface, sloppily, etched with a marker, was a chilling message. "You don't belong here." I sank onto the bed, the photograph clutched in my shaking hands. The woman in the picture looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. How could things have gone so wrong? I thought back to the day we met 5 years ago at a local farmer's market. Edward had been charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Our whirlwind romance had swept me off my feet, and before I knew it, we were walking down the aisle. But the cracks had started to show almost immediately after the honeymoon. Charlotte, Edward's mother, had always been a domineering presence, but I had no idea just how much control she had over her son's life. Every decision, every plan had to be approved by her first. First, I tried to rationalize it. They were close. That was all. But as time went on, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own marriage. I thought about all the times I'd been excluded from family gatherings, all the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The luxury cruise was just the latest in a long line of events I wasn't invited to. How had I let things get this far? As the reality of my situation sank in, I knew I couldn't stay in the house. I was trapped, isolated, and potentially in danger. I needed to get out to find help to figure out what was really going on. But with the doors locked and my phone missing, how could I escape? I moved through the house again, this time with purpose. There had to be a way out. I checked every window looking for any that might not be secured. In the guest bedroom, I found my salvation, a window that opened just enough for me to squeeze through with adrenaline coursing through my veins. I grabbed a few essentials, some clothes, my passport, and what little cash I could find and stuffed them into a small backpack. As I prepared to leave, my eyes fell on a framed photo of Edward and me from happier times on impulse. I grabbed it and shoved it into the bag. I needed a reminder of why I was doing this, of the love I thought we had shared. Climbing out the window was no easy feat. I scraped my arms and tore my shirt, but the pain was nothing compared to the fear of being trapped in that house for another moment. As my feet hit the ground, I felt a surge of relief, quickly followed by a wave of uncertainty. Where could I go? Who could I trust? The answer came to me almost immediately. Mia, my best friend since college. Mia had always been there for me. She had voiced her concerns about Edward and his family more than once. Concerns I had brushed off in my desire to make my marriage work. Now I realized she had seen what I had been blind to. I made my way through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, sticking to the shadows and jumping at every sound. It was late, and the usually busy streets of San Edward were eerily quiet. As I walked, my mind raced with questions. What was Edward really involved in? Why had he reacted so violently to a simple vacation? Cancellation, and what did his cryptic note mean? I'm handling this. By the time I reached Mia's apartment building, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. I buzzed her apartment praying she was home. When her sleepy voice came through the intercom, I nearly broke down in tears. Mia, it's me. I need help. Moments later, I was in her apartment wrapped in a warm embrace as I sobbed into her shoulder. When she pulled back and saw my face, her expression changed from concern to horror. Oh my God, Ko, what happened? Who did this to you? As I recounted the events of the evening, Mia's face grew more and more serious. When I finished, she took my hands in hers, her voice firm. You can't go back, she insisted. Whatever's going on, it's not safe for you there. I nodded, the reality of my situation hitting me anew. I was running from my husband, the man I had promised to spend my life with. How had things gone so terribly wrong? As the night wore on, Mia made up the couch for me and brought me some of her clothes to change into. We talked late into the night, piecing together the puzzle of my marriage. The more we talked, the more I realized how much I had been ignoring. How many red flags I had dismissed. What if this isn't just about the trip? Mia suggested as we sat nursing cups of strong coffee. What if there's a reason they're excluding you? What if they're hiding something? Possibilities clawed at my mind. Edward had always been secretive, quick to dismiss any questions I had about his past, business dealings with his mother, or why large sums of money frequently disappeared from our shared accounts. Something was buried deep in the family's secrets, and I was determined to uncover it. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I made a decision. I couldn't run forever. I needed answers, and I needed to reclaim my life. Whatever Edward and Charlotte were involved in, I had to find out. It was time to stop being a victim and start fighting back. Little did I know my fight was just beginning, and the truth would be more shocking than I could have ever imagined. The next few days at Lee's apartment passed in a blur. I spent most of my time huddled on her couch, alternating between fitful sleep and anxious pacing. Mia, bless her heart, did everything she could to comfort me, but the weight of my situation hung heavy on my shoulders. On the third day, I made a decision. I needed to go back to the house, not to stay, not to reconcile with Edward, but to gather evidence if there was something sinister going on. As Mia and I suspected, I needed proof. Are you sure about this? Mia asked, her forehead created with worry. Could be dangerous. I nodded, feeling more determined than I had in days. I have to know, Mia. I can't move forward until I understand what's really been happening. We planned carefully. I would go during the day when Edward was usually at work. Mia would drive me and wait nearby, ready to call the police if I didn't come out within an hour. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the best we could do. As we pulled up to my street, my heart began to race. The house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, a picture-perfect suburban home with its manicured lawn and cheerful flower beds. How could something so normal-looking hide such dark secrets? Be careful, Mia said. As I got out of the car, I gave her a tight smile and a nod before walking up the familiar path to the front door. My hand shook as I inserted my key into the lock. To my surprise, it turned easily. I stepped inside, half expecting to find Edward waiting for me. But the house was silent, and still I moved through the rooms quickly, gathering anything that might be useful: financial documents, letters, anything that could give me a clue about what Edward and his mother were really up to. In our bedroom, I found my phone tucked away in a drawer. The battery was dead, but I pocketed it anyway. Then I entered Edward's home office. This room had always been off-lease to me, a fact that had bothered me throughout our marriage, but that I'd ultimately accepted. Now I realized how foolish I'd been. The office was immaculate, every surface polished to a shine. I started with the desk drawers, rifling through papers and folders. Most of it seemed mundane: bills, receipts, work documents. But then in the bottom drawer I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a folder labeled Legal Confidential. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents I could barely make sense of: property, deeds in Edward's name, strange contracts with clauses excluding spousal inheritance rights, and something far more alarming: bank statements for an account I'd never known about, showing transfers of substantial amounts of money to offshore accounts. My mind reeled. What was all this? Was Edward involved in some kind of financial fraud? And why had he gone to such lengths to keep me in the dark? But the folder held one more shocking revelation. Tucked in the back was a set of photographs. Of me. They were recent but unflattering, clearly taken without my knowledge. There was one of me leaving the grocery store, another of me walking to work. Even one of me sitting alone in the park where I often went to read. Each one had been meticulously labeled with dates and times. The most chilling part was the words scrawled across several of the photos. Destroy. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the folder. This wasn't just exclusion or control anymore. This was premeditated. But what was the endgame? What had Edward and his mother been planning to do to me? I was so absorbed in my horrifying discovery that I almost didn't hear the front door open. Almost the familiar sound of keys jangling jolted me back to reality. Edward was home. Panic seized me. I scrambled to put everything back as I'd found it, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Edward would hear it. I had just closed the drawer when I heard his footsteps in the hallway. There was nowhere to hide. I stood frozen behind the desk as the office door swung open. Edward's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed dangerously. "Cow," he said, his voice low and controlled. "What are you doing here?" I struggled to keep my voice steady. I came to get some of my things, I lied. I didn't think you'd be home. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence, and you thought you'd do a little snooping while you were at it. I swallowed hard, trying to gauge how much he knew, how much he'd seen. Edward, what's going on? What are all these documents and the photos? Why are you having me? Followed his face, hardened, all pretenses of civility dropping away. You should have stayed in your place, he said, his voice menacing. You don't understand what you've done, then explain it to me. I demanded, surprised by the strength in my own voice. No more lies. Edward, I want the truth. For a long moment, he just stared at me as if weighing his options. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. Truth, he said. You want the truth. Fine. Truth is, you were never supposed to find out any of this. You were supposed to be the perfect wife, supportive, unquestioning, and most importantly, clueless. He began to pace room, his words spilling out in a torrent. The family business isn't what you think it is, Ko. It's not just real estate. That's just the surface, the respectable face. We show the world the real money comes from elsewhere. My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. You're laundering money, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Edward nodded, a twisted smile on his face. Smart girl. Yes, we're laundering money. Lots of it, and you, my dear wife, have been an unwitting part of it. All along, the pieces started to fall into place. The mysterious bank transfers, the secretive meetings with his mother, the way they'd always kept me at arm's length from the family business. You married me for this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You needed my name, my clean record. It wasn't personal, Edward said, as if that somehow made it better. We needed fresh accounts, ones that wouldn't raise suspicion. A new wife was the perfect cover. I felt sick. Our entire marriage had been a lie affront for their illegal operations. Every moment of happiness would shared. Every plan would made for the future. It had all been fake. And the cruise? I asked, remembering the catalyst that had started all this. That wasn't really a vacation, was it? Edward shook his head. It was a business trip. We're expanding our operations, and we needed to meet with some associates. Your little stunt with canceling the reservations could have cost us everything. The anger in his voice made me flinch, remembering the violence he'd shown that night. But I stood my ground. What were you planning to do with me? I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know those photos for the first time. Edward looked uncomfortable. That wasn't my idea, he said. My mother, she thought you were becoming a liability. She wanted to make sure we had options if you became problematic. The implication behind his words was clear, and it chilled me to the bone. They had been planning to get rid of me one way or another. So what happens now? I asked, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Edward sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. Ko, you weren't supposed to find out about any of this. Complicates things. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I want out, I said firmly. I don't want any part of this. Let me go, and I won't say anything to anyone about what I've learned. He laughed again, but this time it was tinged with genuine amusement. You think it's that easy? You can't just walk away from this, Ko. You're in too deep, whether you like it or not. As he spoke, I noticed his hand moving towards his pocket. Was he reaching for a phone, a weapon? I didn't want to find out in that moment. I made a split-second decision. I lunged forward, catching Edward off guard. My shoulder connected with his chest, sending him stumbling backwards. I didn't wait to see if he'd fallen. I just ran. I tore through the house, Edward's angry shouts following me. I burst out the front door, gasping for air, my eyes frantically searching for Mia's car. To my immense relief, I saw her pull up to the curb, her face a mask of concern. I sprinted towards her, practically diving into the passenger seat. Go, I yelled and Mia didn't hesitate. She floored it, the tires screeching as we sped away. In the rear-viewed mirror, I could see Edward standing in the doorway, watching us drive away. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of his gaze. This wasn't over, not by a long shot as we drove. I filled Mia in on everything I'd learned. Her face grew paler with each revelation. "Oh, Co," she said. When I'd finished, "What are we going to do?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know I can't go back, not ever." As the familiar streets of San Edward flew by, I realized that my life as I knew it was over. I was running from my husband, from his family, from a criminal operation I'd unwittingly been part of. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore, whatever came next. I would face it head-on. It was time to take control of my own story. The next few days were a blur of fear, uncertainty, and frantic planning. Mia, bless her heart, insisted I stay with her. "You're not facing this alone," she said firmly, and I couldn't find the words to express my gratitude. We spent hours discussing our next move. Should we go to the police? But with no concrete evidence, it would be my word against Edward's, and I had no doubt his family's influence ran deep. Should we leave town? But where would we go, and how long could we run? On the third night, as we sat at Mia's kitchen table, empty coffee mugs scattered around us, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Ko," she said gently, "what about your family? Have you told them what's happening?" I felt a pang of guilt and longing. My parents and younger sister lived back in Brazil, where I'd grown up when I'd moved to the States for college and then stayed after meeting Edward. They'd been supportive but sad. We still talked regularly, but I'd been avoiding their calls since this whole mess started. "I can't involve them in this," I said, shaking my head. "It's too dangerous, and honestly, I'm ashamed. How do I tell them that my entire marriage has been a lie?" Mia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They're your family, Ko. They love you, and right now you need all the support you can get." I knew she was right, but the thought of making that call filled me with dread. Still, I couldn't put it off forever. The next morning, I borrowed Mia's phone. I still didn't trust my own and dialed the familiar number. My mom answered on the second ring. "Allo, May," I said, my voice cracking. "It's me." There was a pause, then a flood of rapid Portuguese. "Ko Minher, fill her. Where have you been?" "We've been so worried," Edward called, said you'd had a fight and left. My blood ran cold. Edward had already reached out to them. May, I interrupted, "listen to me. I don't have much time to explain, but I'm in trouble. Edward is not who we thought he was." Over the next half hour, I gave my mother a condensed version of events. I could hear her gasps of shock and murmured prayers. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Oh, Minher Curia," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "What can we do? Should we come to you?" "No," I said quickly. "No, it's too dangerous. I don't want you involved, I needed you to know the truth." We talked a bit longer, my mother alternating between offering comfort and practical advice. By the time we hung up, I felt both drained and oddly relieved. At least now they knew, and I wasn't carrying this burden alone. As the days passed, Mia and I fell into a routine of sorts. She'd go to work and I'd spend my days researching, looking into Edward's family history, trying to piece together the extent of their operations. It was like putting together a massive, complex puzzle with half the pieces missing. One afternoon, about a week after my escape, I was deep in an internet rabbit hole when something caught my eye. It was an old newspaper article about a charity gala hosted by Charlotte Edwards' mother. The photo showed her standing next to a man I didn't recognize, but the caption made my heart skip beat. "Charlotte James with business partner Lucas Hawkins." Hawkins, where had I heard that name before? Then it hit me. It was one of the names I'd seen on those suspicious contracts in Edward's office. I dug deeper and a pattern began to emerge. Hawkins' name appeared in connection with the James family multiple times over the years, always in seemingly innocuous contexts. Charity, events business, lunches, property developments. But now, knowing what I knew, I saw these encounters for what they likely were: meetings to coordinate their illegal activities. I was so engrossed in my research that I almost missed the sound of a key in the lock. Mia was home early. "Poe." She called out, her voice tense. "Are you here?" I emerged from the spare room to find Mia standing in the living room, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, instantly on alert. She took a deep breath. "I think someone's been following me, a black SUV. I noticed it yesterday, but I thought I was being paranoid. But today it was there again. Always a few cars behind me." My stomach dropped. "Had Edward found us?" "Are you sure?" Mia nodded. "I'm sure I took a few random turns to test it. They stayed with me the whole time." We spent the next hour checking all the windows and doors, drawing the curtains tight. Mia wanted to call the police, but I hesitated. What if Edward had connections in the department? We couldn't trust anyone. As night fell, we huddled in the living room, jumping at every sound from the street. It was past midnight when Mia finally fell into a fitful sleep on the couch. I remained awake, my mind racing. I thought back to my life before all this. Before Edward, before I'd left Brazil, I'd been so eager for adventure, for a taste of the American dream. Now, that dream had turned into a nightmare, and I longed for the simplicity of my old life. But dwelling on the past wouldn't help me now. I needed to focus on the future, on finding a way out of this mess. As I sat there in the darkness, an idea began to form the next morning. I shared my plan with Mia. "We need to gather evidence," I said. "Real, concrete evidence of what Edward and his family are up to. It's the only way to protect ourselves." Mia looked skeptical. "And how exactly do we do that? It's not like we can just walk into their offices and start digging through files." I took a deep breath. "No, but I might know someone who can help us, someone on the inside." Mia's eyes widened as she realized what I was suggesting: Edward's mother's assistant. "Are you sure we can trust her?" I nodded. "Olivia's always been kind to me, even when Charlotte was at her worst. And I've seen the way she looks at Charlotte, sometimes like she knows something's not right but is afraid to speak up. I think she might be willing to help us." It was a risk reaching out to Olivia if I was wrong about her. If she was loyal to the James family, it could blow up in our faces, but it felt like our only option. With shaking hands, I dialed Olivia's personal number, praying she'd pick up on the fourth ring. I heard her familiar voice. "Hello, Olivia," I said quietly. "It's Noah. Please don't hang up. I need your help." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she'd ended the call. Then, so softly I almost missed it, she said, "I've been waiting for your call." Over the next hour, Olivia confirmed my worst fears. And then some. The James family's corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined, with tentacles reaching into local politics, law enforcement, and even some federal agencies. "They're planning something big," Olivia told me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know all the details, but it's happening soon. That cruise you canceled. It wasn't just a meeting. They're moving a huge amount of money, setting up some kind of major operation." My mind reeled. "Olivia, we need proof, documents, recordings, anything that shows what they're doing." Another pause. "I might be able to get you something," she said finally, "but Ko, you have to understand this is dangerous if they find out I'm helping you." "I know," I said, feeling the weight of what I was asking, and I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. "But Olivia, this might be our only chance to stop them." We made plans to meet in 3 days at a small cafe across town. As I hung up, I felt a mix of hope and terror. We were making progress, but at what cost? Mia, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. "You're incredibly brave, you know that," she said. I shook my head. "I'm terrified," I admitted, "but I can't let them win. I can't let them keep hurting people." As we settled in for another restless night, I found myself thinking of my family back in Brazil, of lazy Sundays spent at my grandmother's house, the smell of Fiji Arta filling the air, of my sister's laughter as we chased each other through the streets of our neighborhood, of my father's strong, callous hands as he taught me to change a tire. I missed them with an ache that felt physical. But I knew that by staying away, by fighting this battle on my own, I was protecting them. And maybe, just maybe, if we succeeded in bringing down Edward and his family, I could go home again, not just to visit but to stay, to rebuild my life in the place where I'd always felt safest. But first we had to survive the next 3 days, and in the world I now found myself in, even that was far from guaranteed. The next 3 days crawled by at an agonizingly slow pace. Mia and I were constantly on edge, jumping at every unexpected sound, peering out of windows at the slightest noise. The black SUV hadn't made another appearance, but its absence was almost more unsettling than its presence. Were we still being watched, or had they given up on the morning of our planned meeting with Olivia? I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My stomach was in knots and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mia noticed my state and gave me a reassuring hug. "We can still call this off," she said gently. "No one would blame you for walking away from all this." I shook my head. "No. I have to see this through. I can't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when they'll come for me." We arrived at the cafe an hour early, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. I nursed a cup of coffee that I couldn't bring myself to drink, my eyes darting to the door every time it opened. At exactly 11 a.m., Olivia walked in. She looked different from how I remembered her, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. She ordered a tea at the counter before making her way to our table. Her movements carefully casual. "Ko," she said softly as she sat down, "It's good to see you." I introduced her to Mia, and for a few minutes we engaged in stilted small talk, all too aware of the real reason for our meeting. Finally, Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything I could find is on here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Financial records, emails, meeting notes. It's worse than you think, Ko." I reached for the drive, but Olivia held on to it for a moment longer. "Once I give you this, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for what's on here?" I met her eyes, seeing the fear and resolve mirror red in them. "I'm sure," I said firmly. She nodded and released the drive as I pocketed it. She continued, speaking, her words coming faster. "Now they're planning something big. I don't know all the details, but it involves moving a massive amount of money offshore. They're calling it Operation Exodus." "When?" Mia asked, leaning in. "Soon. Within the next week. I think they've been working around the clock, making calls at all hours. Charlotte's been particularly on edge." I felt a chill run down my spine. Whatever this Operation Exodus was, it sounded like the culmination of years of illegal activities. If we could stop it, we might be able to bring down the entire operation. "What about Edward?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. "Is he involved?" Olivia's expression softened with sympathy. "He at the center of it all, Ko. From what I've overheard, he's the one coordinating everything." "I'm so sorry," I nodded, swallowing hard. Part of me had still hoped that Edward was somehow less involved, that maybe he'd been coerced or manipulated by his mother. But this confirmation of his central role extinguished that last flicker of hope. We talked for a while longer, Olivia filling us in on as many details as she could. As we were about to leave, she grabbed my hand. "Be careful, Ko. These people, they're dangerous. If they find out I've helped you, they won't," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "We'll protect you. I promise." Back at Mia's apartment, we huddled around her laptop, our hearts racing as we plugged in the USB drive. File after file popped up: spreadsheets, PDFs, audio recordings. It was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. As we dug deeper, the true scope of the James family's operations became clear. They weren't just laundering money. They were involved in a complex web of fraud, bribery, and even blackmail. Politicians, judges, business leaders, so many influential figures were implicated in these documents. Oh my God. Mia breathed as we scrolled through a particularly damning email chain. This is huge. This could bring down half the city's leadership. I nodded, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of what we'd uncovered. We need to take this to the authorities, but who can we trust? We spent hours poring over the files, making notes, trying to piece together the full picture of Operation Exodus. It seemed to involve moving vast sums of money through a series of shell companies before ultimately transferring it to accounts in countries with strict banking secrecy laws. The amount of money involved was staggering 11 of millions of dollars. As night fell, we were still at it, our eyes burning from staring at the screen for so long. That's when we found it, a file that made my blood run cold. It was a detailed plan, complete with my photo and personal information. The document outlined a scheme to frame me for embezzlement using accounts set up in my name. Without my knowledge, they had planned to make me the scapegoat for their entire operation. This is why they married me, I said, my voice shaking. They needed someone to take the fall. When things inevitably came crashing down, Mia put her arm around me, pulling me close. We won't let that happen, she said. Fiercely, we have the evidence. Now we can fight back. Just then, a noise from outside made us both freeze. It sounded like a car door slamming, followed by footsteps. We rushed to the window, peering out cautiously. My heart nearly stopped there. Getting out of a familiar black SUV was Edward. How did he find us? Mia whispered, her face pale. I shook my head. My mind racing. Had Olivia betrayed us? Had we been followed from the cafe? Or had Edward known where we were all along, just biding his time? We have to get out of here, I said, already moving to gather our things. We can't let him get his hands on this evidence. We shoved the laptop and USB drive into a bag along with some clothes and whatever cash we had on hand. As we heard footsteps on the stairs outside the apartment, we slipped out onto the fire escape. Cool night air hit me as we climbed down, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Edward would hear it. We had just reached the ground when we heard the sound of Mia's apartment door being kicked and run. Mia hissed, grabbing my hand. We took off down the alley behind the building, the sound of shouting behind us, spurring us on. I had no idea where we were going, but I knew we couldn't stop. As we ran, weaving through back streets and side alleys, my mind was in turmoil. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, I had been living what I thought was a normal life. Now I was running for my life, carrying evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy, being chased by the man I had once loved. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like jelly. Finally, we ducked into a 24-hour diner, sliding into a booth at the back. As we caught our breath, I looked at Mia, seeing the same mix of fear and determination in her eyes that I felt. What do we do now? She asked between gasps. I pulled out my phone, not my old one, but a cheap prepaid one we'd bought for emergencies. We need help, I said, professional help with shaking. Vanishing enough games. He said, his voice low and dangerous. Where's the drive? I stepped back, my heart racing. What drive? He moved towards me, his eyes flashing with anger. Don't play dumb. I know Olivia gave you something. Where is it? I don't know what you're talking about, I insisted, my back hitting the wall. Edward, you're scaring me. What's going on? For a moment, he just stared at me as if trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. Then, to my shock, he laughed. It was a cold, humorous sound that made my blood run cold. You really don't know, do you? He said, shaking his head. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. And then, to my amazement, he started talking. Maybe he thought I was too naive to understand, or maybe he just needed to unburden himself. But he laid it all out: the money laundering, the bribes, the blackmail. He confirmed everything we'd found on the drive and more. It wasn't personal, he said, almost conversational. When I married you, it was just business. We needed a clean name, someone above suspicion. You were perfect. Each word was like a knife to my heart, but I forced myself to keep listening, to keep him talking. I thought of the wire of Aaron and his team listening in. We just needed a little more and Operation Exodus. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What is that? Edward's eyes narrowed. How do you know about that? I realized my mistake too late. Edward's hand shot out, grabbing my arm roughly. You're wired, aren't you? He snarled his fingers, digging into my skin. Before I could react, he had me pinned against the wall, his other hand roughly searching for the wire. I struggled against him, panic rising in my throat. Edward. Please, I gasped, you're hurting me, but the man I'd once loved was gone. Placed by this furious stranger as his hand closed around my throat, I saw my life flash before my eyes. Was this how it would end? Suddenly, the door burst open. Police freeze. Aaron and his team flooded into the room. Weapons drawn. Edward released me, raising his hands slowly as an officer cuffed him. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You've ruined everything, he spat. As they led him away, I slumped against the wall, my legs barely able to support me. It was over. Finally, it was over. Aaron approached me, concern etched on his face. Are you all right? He asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As the adrenaline wore off, the full weight of what had just happened hit me. I began to shake uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. Aaron put a comforting hand on my shoulder. You did good, KO, really good. It's over now, you're safe. As I let his words sink in, I realized that for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. If really. The nightmare was over, and though I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, I also knew that I had survived. I had faced my fears, confronted the lies, and come out stronger. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. Face to face. The days following Edward's arrest passed in a blur of police statements, legal meetings, and sleepless nights. I found myself in a strange limbo, free from the immediate danger but still trapped by the aftermath of the life I'd left behind. The safe house became a sanctuary of sorts, a place where I could begin to process everything that had happened. Mia was my rock through it all. She stayed with me despite the inconvenience to her own life, offering a shoulder to cry on and a voice of reason when my thoughts spiraled into darkness. I don't know how I would have made it through without her. A week after the arrest, Detective Aaron visited us with news. The Dawes office is moving forward with the case, he said, his weathered face showing signs of fatigue but also satisfaction. Your testimony, combined with the evidence from the USB drive, has given us everything we need to bring down not just Edward but the entire James operation. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt a gnawing anxiety. What happens now? I asked. Aaron's expression softened. Now we keep you safe until the trial. Could be months before this goes to court, and the James family still has allies out there. The thought of months more in hiding made my heart sink, but I knew it was necessary. As Aaron was leaving, he paused at the door. You did a brave thing. Toe. Not many people would have had the courage to face what you did. His words stayed with me long after he left. Had I been brave or just desperate, either way, I knew I couldn't stay in this holding pattern forever. I needed to start rebuilding my life. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I asked Mia to help me create a plan. We spent the day brainstorming, making lists and researching options by evening. We had a rough roadmap for my future. Step 1 was dealing with the practical matters I needed to legally separate myself from Edward and the James family's finances. This meant lawyers' paperwork and diving into the messy details of our shared accounts. It was daunting, but with Mia's support and the guidance of a lawyer recommended by Aaron, I began the process of disentangling myself from the web of lies and illegal activities. As we worked through the legalities, I also started thinking about my career. Before marrying Edward, I'd been working on a master's degree in environmental science. I'd put it on hold to support his career, a decision I now regretted bitterly. But maybe it wasn't too late to pick up where I'd left off. I reached out to my old advisor, explaining my situation minus the criminal details and asking about the possibility of re-enrolling. To my surprise and delight, she was incredibly supportive. We set up a meeting to discuss my options, giving me something positive to focus on. Amidst the chaos, weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely I began to see progress. The legal proceedings moved forward with each development, bringing me closer to true freedom from Edward and his family. I testified before a grand jury, my voice shaking but determined as I recounted the details of the James family's criminal enterprise. Throughout this time, I remained under police protection, moving between safe houses to ensure my security. It was a strange, nomadic existence, but it gave me time to reflect and heal. I started seeing a therapist, working through the trauma of the past months and the lingering effects of the emotional manipulation I'd endured throughout my marriage. One day, about 4 months after Edward's arrest, Aaron arrived with news that sent shockwaves through my world. "We've got Charlotte," he said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "She was trying to flee the country, but we intercepted her at the airport. It's over. We've got them all." The relief I felt was overwhelming. For the first time since this all began, I allowed myself to truly believe that I was free. That night, Mia and I celebrated with takeout and cheap champagne, laughing and crying as we toasted to new beginnings. As the case against the James family built, more and more details came to light. The extent of their criminal network was staggering, reaching into levels of government and business that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. My small act of defiance canceling that cruise reservation had been the first domino to fall, leading to the collapse of an empire built on corruption and greed. 7 months after Edward's arrest, I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding. As I prepared to give my testimony in open court, Mia squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You've got this," she whispered. As I walked into the courtroom, I caught sight of Edward for the first time since his arrest. He looked smaller somehow, his designer suit replaced by prison garb, the confident swagger gone from his posture. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret, anger. Before he looked away, taking the stand, I felt a strength I didn't know I possessed. I told my story clearly and firmly, my voice growing stronger with each word. I spoke of the manipulation, the lies, the gradual realization that my entire marriage had been a sham. And as I talked, I felt the last chains of fear and doubt fall away. In the end, justice prevailed. Edward, Charlotte, and their associates were convicted on multiple charges. The sentencing brought a sense of closure, but also a strange sadness despite everything. A small part of me mourned for the future I'd once thought we'd have together. As life began to return to some semblance of normalcy, I faced a decision. My family in Brazil had been begging me to come home to leave behind the painful memories and start fresh. It was tempting, the idea of returning to the warmth and familiarity of my homeland. But as I stood on the beach watching the sun set over the Pacific, I realized something. San Edward, for all the pain it now held, had become my home. This was where I'd faced my greatest challenges and found my true strength. This was where I'd rediscovered myself. I enrolled back in my master's program, throwing myself into my studies with renewed passion. Mia and I found an apartment together, creating a home filled with laughter and light so different from the cold, controlled environment I'd lived in with Edward. Slowly but surely, I began to build a new life for myself. I volunteered at a local women's shelter, sharing my story and helping others find the strength to leave abusive situations. It was painful at times revisiting my own trauma, but it was also incredibly healing. A year after the trial, I stood on the stage at my graduation ceremony, accepting my master's degree in environmental science. As I looked out at the crowd, I saw Mia cheering wildly, and next to her, my parents and sister who had flown in for the occasion. My heart swelled with love and gratitude. That evening, as we celebrated with a beachside barbecue, I found a quiet moment to slip away to the water's edge as the waves lapped at my feet. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain, the fear, the moments of utter despair. They were all part of me now, but they didn't define me. I thought of Edward sitting in a prison cell and felt a complex mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and finally pity. He had chosen his path, and now he had to live with the consequences. But me, I was free. As I walked back to my friends and family, their laughter carrying on the ocean breeze, I felt a profound sense of peace. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. I didn't know exactly what it held, but I knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, I was strong enough to face it. My life had been forged in fire, but from those flames I had emerged stronger, wiser, and truly free. And that freedom, it was the most precious thing in the world. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening and see you in the next videos.